So we finally meet. Oh, just another simple little man thing.
Oh man. Oh man, they could have done so much better.
Yeah, that shit crazy.
Teleport over there?
Oh, she walked over there.
Oh, that's real quick walk. Okay, so they can come in.
Oh, I didn't even know that. She's like, no.
You disgusting outsider!
Oh man. Oh man.
That's crazy, yo.
Oh my goodness. What now? Oh my goodness.
Where do you think you're going?
Oh, it's so broken.
They actually Capcom they did the same thing with the the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes when the enemies couldn't enter the fucking certain doors and shit.
Yeah, I don't like that.
It was funny when they did it then, but now it's just like, come on, guys. Every game. Resident Evil Village was developed and published by Capcom, and it is the eighth mainline entry in the Resident Evil franchise, a franchise that has recently celebrated its 25th anniversary. And so Resident Evil at this point is one of the most well known and longest running franchises in the gaming industry. It's one of the most popular IPs in the gaming industry, and it's one of the only franchises that has been able to pull itself out of the creative slump that the series was stuck in for a long time. And this game is also coming off of the high critical praise that came with Resident Evil 7. And Resident Evil 7, speaking briefly on it, because I can't really discuss this game without mentioning Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 7 was great because it was a reinvention for the franchise. It basically turned the rule on its head and challenged the idea of what a Resident Evil game could be. And it did so in the best way possible. And it ended up being one of the best games that came out last generation. It became one of my favorite games in the series, and it's up there with some of the best games in the franchise. As far as I'm concerned, the top three games in the series is Resident Evil 4, 2, and 7. So Resident Evil Village, as far as where it places and everything. Well, before I even get into that, I want to mention that first and foremost, Resident Evil Village it's a good game, for sure. And basically, most of what this game is basically like a modern Resident Evil 4. And they really emphasize that, just outright, as just in terms of like the game setting. And there is a lot more, and I mean a lot more emphasis on action. I'm going to mention that again later in this retrospective in this video. Starting off on what Resident Evil Village gets right, because ultimately Resident Evil Village, despite the fact that it's a good game, and despite the fact that there's a lot here to enjoy, Capcom really went backwards a few steps from the progress that they made with Resident Evil 7. Realistically, this is a regression. It's almost a regression back to the bullshit days of Resident Evil 6, especially towards the later third of the game. Now, before I go deep into the flaws, I do want to mention, what Capcom actually did get right. First and foremost, graphically, the game looks beautiful. I don't have the strongest PC. My PC's like mid-range, and so I wasn't able to play the game with like the modern, graphical features that you will find on like a high-end PC or like PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X with the ray tracing effects and all that. But even without all that, the game still looks fantastic. It has a great art direction, throughout all the major locations that you visit in the game. And the village itself is very eerie. It has a creepy, vibe to it, but it also has a very quiet tone to it as well. And that's because the majority of the inhabitants of the village really are no longer there. They've either been turned into monsters or they have been murdered. So the village itself is largely quiet. It's a quiet experience, and that's what you want for a survival horror game. You want things to be quiet and not loud. So when a scare does happen, it throws you off your feet. Another thing they got right was the gunplay. As far as the gunplay goes, like the way the weapons feel, the way the weapons handle as far as firing, recoil, and just the majority of the weapons that they have in the game. It definitely does feel like classic Resident Evil. They cover all the basics from your basic handgun to a more upgraded version of the handgun, Magnum, like two or three different shotguns that they have in the game. They have a grenade launcher that's in there that has a different assortment of rounds. They have your sniper rifle, which becomes very important in this game from the moment you find it earlier in the game to some of the later portions, and just throughout in general. So the gunplay is legit quality in this game, but it is the most subjective thing that anyone who's watching this is going to hear me say throughout this video, because the gunplay is not something that I know that everyone is going to enjoy. I've read a lot of the reviews for this game before I was able to preload it, because again, I played this on PC. And some of the complaints from your major video game publications and other review outlets is that the gunplay feels like clunky and slow and unresponsive. And I can see how someone would have that view. And that's because it's a survival horror game. This isn't a traditional first-person shooter. The game developers don't treat it as such, at least for the first half. I would say for the first, 3/4 of the game, it really does play like a traditional survival horror game. And then it starts to lean into a different direction, which again, I'll get into. But outside of those positives, another thing that I really enjoyed was like some of the characters that they had in here, particularly the Duke. I think the Duke is one of the best characters that they have in the game. I think it's a bit ridiculous that they made him as big as he is. I'm not really sure where that came from, or if that's like some kind of internal joke at Capcom to make him big like that. And big is really an understatement, like he's fat as hell. I don't know where the inspiration for that came from, but that's just one of the decisions that the development team made, and it just stuck. So Weapon crafting does come back. That does return. You can craft ammunition in this game. You can also craft, healing items. You can craft, various assortments of like bombs and different things like that. And they also have a hunting system in the game that's very new and different for a Resident Evil game, where in specific spots only, you can go and hunt down various animals like chickens, pigs, fish, even. You go and you take the meat from these animals that you hunt down, and you give them to the Duke. And in exchange, he'll cook a meal for you, and you'll permanently gain like various buffs that you actually need to get through the game successfully, such as a permanent health upgrade or a permanent increase in your defense, like when you're guarding against enemies. That aspect is something that I was actually concerned with before the release of the game, and after having played it, it's something that actually does work well, and it fits. The important thing is that it fits the village theme, and so that's something that actually really worked for me. And so those are the major positive points that I took notice of during my first playthrough. So now I'm going to get into the negatives of what didn't really work so well, and some of these issues are severe, glaring problems that Capcom definitely should have addressed before the game's release. And some of these flaws are just things that really is just the ignorance and the stupidity of the game developers themselves. So, the first thing that really didn't work for me were the boss characters, not the boss fights. The boss fights in the game are pretty fun. They're epic set pieces, and they really do keep you invested and keep you moving around, and they feel like a traditional Resident Evil game. And so I didn't really have an issue with the boss fights themselves, but the boss characters are just a complete waste in this game. So much to the point that the game just felt like a waste of time, narratively speaking, because the game clearly wants you to have investment as the player into these characters who have taken over the village, and unfortunately these characters are really just underutilized throughout pretty much the entire run of the game's story. And so basically the way Capcom has set up the village is that the village is divided into basically four different quadrants, and the game has what's known as these four characters that are called lords. And there's one lord for each section of the village as a whole. You have Lady Dimitrescu, who is the 9 foot tall vampire lady who has been heavily advertised in the game's marketing and has a pretty wide fan base at this point. So she's one of the lords in the game. And then there's Donna Beneviento, who is like a ventriloquist character who dresses in all black and has like a creepy Annabelle-like doll that she controls. And after Beneviento, you have Salvador Moreau. And Salvador Moreau is like this grotesque looking creature or whatever that has like a hunchback, and he has basically control of the flooded part of the village, with the abandoned houses. And then last but not least is Carl Heisenberg, who is basically Capcom's version of Magneto from Marvel Comics, and he is in control of a factory which is located somewhere on the western side of the village, the upper western side. So, and basically these four characters, they all have their own individual level that's themed after what they are. And so, for example, in Castle Dimitrescu, which is that's the first location that you go to, that whole level is themed after like the idea of blood. There's a lot of blood in that level. There's like pools of blood, and the Beneviento level is more It's more quiet. There's not as much going on, and that level is for the most part themed after the genre of psychological horror. And these are just examples of what these levels are actually supposed to represent. They're supposed to complement the boss or whatever that you later have to face for each major section of the village. The problem, though, with the boss characters, like I said, is that they're underutilized. You do learn about the boss characters, but you really learn about them through the various notes that are scattered around the game. There's really no character development at all for the in-game cutscenes, which are limited. And so when you actually go to fight one of these bosses, there's really no reason to be invested because the bosses once again have been just underused and not presented in the most unique way. So one of this game's biggest disappointments, which has been highlighted in just about every major review, be it positive or mixed, is that Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters, the daughter characters, whose names are Cassandra, Bella, and Daniela, those characters are basically in the game for maybe around 2 hours, 2.5 hours max. And using Lady Dimitrescu and the daughter characters as examples, there's a lot of missed opportunities where the developers could have put in more in-game cutscenes to really flesh out the characters and have them emote more. So when Ethan, takes out one of the daughter characters or whatever, you'll hear dialogue from Lady Dimitrescu commenting on how she's angry that Ethan has killed one of her children, but there's not really much of an exchange between her and the daughters themselves, and there's not really any scene where the daughter characters actually appear together outside of the introduction scene, which we've all seen through the trailers, the promotional material for. There's no scene in the game where the daughter characters gather and basically plot and discuss as to how they're going to hunt and kill Ethan. And again, as far as their backstory goes, it's completely delegated to the in-game notes that you find that are scattered around, the level. And this is really how Capcom has implemented all of the different boss characters in the game. You really don't learn anything about them just from the in-game cutscenes themselves. And it really is a huge missed opportunity because the boss characters, given how different they are from one another, as the player, you want to learn more about them, but Capcom doesn't ever give you the chance to actually learn more about those characters. And as far as Lady Dimitrescu and the daughter characters go, because out of all of the major lords that are in the game, Alcina is the only one that is actually active as an actual threat in the level that she appears in. And that's one aspect of this game that I was really looking forward to, was seeing Lady Dimitrescu in action. But unfortunately, the developers ruined that too because, unfortunately, the way that they developed Lady Dimitrescu is that she is very similar. She's basically this game's version of Mr. X from Resident Evil 2, Tyrant, and Nemesis from Resident Evil 3, in which she'll stalk the player throughout, her specific section of the game. The problem, though, is that Ethan can basically outrun her. She's too slow. She takes forever making her way over to you, and she never runs or like sprints like Nemesis does. And I think that's not really a complaint, because I think it would have looked ridiculous for a woman that's that tall who's wearing a white dress to be charging after you. I think that would have looked a little bit too silly, and I don't think the concept would have really worked that well if that's the angle that they were gonna go with. But because she's too slow and Ethan can outrun her, she's not really a threat. And her attack animations are glorified to hell and back. They're very scripted, and you can easily tell when she's about to strike. And one of the things that's most prolific about this game's combat system is that you can actually juke around the different enemies that do appear. So if there is a tight space where you can maneuver your way around an enemy NPC, the game will let you do it. And Alcina really is developed that way. Another thing that doesn't work with her is that, similar to Resident Evil 2 and 3, the remakes for those games, Lady Dimitrescu cannot enter certain rooms. As a result, certain doors or whatever that Ethan is able to enter, Lady Dimitrescu will not be able to basically follow him, even though she should be able to just duck, and just go into any room that's within the castle. She hasn't been designed that way. And so it just becomes rather silly, because this is a complaint that people were voicing since the Resident Evil 2 remake. And Capcom still has yet to address that. Here we are a few years later. And so all the way around, Lady Dimitrescu, the brief period of time that she has in the game, as well as the daughter characters, I did enjoy the game a lot whenever they were on screen. But unfortunately, it's just too short-lived, and they could have done a lot more with her character. Although I think Capcom basically ran out of time. They didn't have time to incorporate Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters basically for an extended period of time in the game by the time they actually revealed her prior to the game's release. And the second level with Donna Beneviento, which has, again, a more psychological horror approach, is technically the strongest level in the game when it comes to the actual fear factor, while Castle Dimitrescu serves as more of a traditional Resident Evil experience. Together, these two levels are the strongest that Capcom has to offer in this game. The Flooded Houses level with Moreau is still good, but the fear factor definitely is not there. And then by the time you get to the factory, this game basically devolves into a big dumb action game by that point. They even have a boss fight later in the game where you take control of a machine and that has like a Gatling gun and a cannon on it. And then the damn thing has a chainsaw on it as well. So by the time you get to the factory, the game has nothing else to offer as far as it being a horror experience. And while the intricate level design remains, the tone has definitely shifted a great deal at that point compared to the earlier sequences. And what you're left with really isn't that unique or interesting. It's bad enough that the game was already borrowing too many elements from the earlier games in the series. But what's most disappointing about Resident Evil Village really is the story. The story in Resident Evil 7 was the big highlight. It was a huge improvement over pretty much any other Resident Evil game that's come before it, and is easily the strongest game in the series, narratively speaking. Resident Evil Village starts off with a lot of promise, but regrettably it does regress the further you go, to the point where it's just downright silly. Even some of the moments from Castle Dimitrescu is really something that you would see out of a cartoon, and certain scenes you just simply can't take serious.
Wretch, you come into my house. You lay your filthy man-hands on my daughters, and now you even try to steal my property. Dare. Rest while you can, because I will hunt you, and I will break you.
They could have been killed him by now. Just let him escape.
Do your worst.
This motherfucker fell through three. Three. He's still walking, dude. This shit was funny right here. You gotta collect that shit too.
You don't tell me just put Bro, what is Capcom on? Oh, wow.
Screw this castle.
Wow. Wow. Bro, that right there.
It's almost as if the development team over at Capcom wants their fan base to make fun of these things. And so, coming off of Resident Evil 7, I had a lot of expectations going into Resident Evil Village, only to be disappointed with the end result because, as I mentioned earlier, the boss characters in the game are extremely underutilized and underdeveloped to the point where you really don't care about any one of them, which is a shame. And the Ethan and Mia characters in particular, just the whole angle that Capcom went with those characters just makes me scratch my head, really, because Mia is pretty much absent throughout this entire game, and she just becomes the typical annoying housewife that she is in this game, and she was shown to be a much stronger character in Resident Evil 7. So I'm not sure why she's been downgraded, basically. And as far as Ethan goes, as great as Resident Evil 7 was, the Ethan Winters character himself was one of the downsides to that game because he simply was just a blank slate that had no personality. And in this game, he once again is a blank slate with no personality. They didn't improve the Ethan character at all. If anything, he largely remains the same. And Capcom still refuses to show the player what he even looks like. Like, once you finish the game, you have the option to unlock these in game character models. They have a model viewer in the game of all the major characters that appear. And Ethan, his face is shrouded by a silhouette. And even in the game's prologue, they have certain pictures that are in the environment in the Winter's home. And there's a photo of Ethan and Mia's wedding, and Ethan's face is still covered by the veil on the wedding gown of Mia. And like I said, it's just something that you can't really take serious. And thus, by the end of the game, when the story tries to pull a big revelation out of its ass about Ethan himself, it really doesn't work because there's no reason for the player to be invested in Ethan at all. What was truly perplexing to me, though, was the very last cutscene, which is basically a big time skip. And I'm not even sure, because of the way the scene is set up, I'm not sure if it's actual setup for Resident Evil 9 or if it's just, that's the end of the Winter storyline. But from what I read, Capcom intends for these Ethan Winters Resident Evil games to be like a trilogy. So that means they have one game left. But because of what happened at the end of this game, once again, I'm not sure exactly what their plan is. But they do leave some threads open, although there's not really much of a reason to care at this point. And the last major character that shows up in this is a character that's on the cover art of this game, and that's Chris Redfield. And Chris Redfield really is largely unimportant in this game. You can tell they really only threw him in the game just to say, hey, here's a popular Resident Evil character, for the diehard fans. But if I were to look at things objectively, they could have replaced Chris with any character, and the story would have played out basically the same way. Like I said, he's largely unimportant. They do have a moment with Chris Redfield in his little gameplay section or whatever towards the end, where the game literally drops the horror theme and just becomes a straight action experience. And it seems like something that belongs in a different game, like a Call of Duty or a Halo or something like that. But thankfully, in that sequence, it kind of worked because of like the soundtrack. They have this like action set piece soundtrack that has like a horror motif in it. That's playing in the background when you're playing as Chris Redfield, and it kind of does work. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, the story is pretty boring. It's one note. It's predictable in some fashion, and it's also silly in different areas if you were to pick it apart. And like I said, that's just a huge step down from Resident Evil 7, which benefited from being set in a location that was more realistic and believable, and also leaving behind a lot of the lore from the Resident Evil series. And this game really goes back to the same old nonsense in some ways. It goes back to what we got before Resident Evil 7 with the ridiculous plot lines and the convoluted character arcs and everything. Yeah, they didn't really do a good job with the story. Now, with all those major flaws taken into account, Resident Evil Village, despite its issues, is a game that I did enjoy. It's still a very fun experience, and it's easily one of the better games in the series. But I think some people are definitely overrating this. I've heard some accounts that people think that this is like the best game in the series, and it's not even close. I think it's up there with some of the better games in the series, like I said, but it's ultimately at the end of the day, it's not everything that it could have been. Although, like I said, I wasn't really truly disappointed to the point where I'm just like, yeah, what the fuck is this? It wasn't like a Square Enix game. That's the best way I can put it. It was still a very fun gameplay experience, despite the silly moments and the various issues I had with like the story and the characters, what have you. But all in all, this is it's a straightforward Resident Evil experience, but it's not anything truly unique or special, despite its potential. And if I had to rank it among like the other games in the series, I would say it's like within the top five. I'd place it just above like the first Resident Evil and behind the top three, which again is 2, 4, and 7. But personal ranking aside, yeah, Resident Evil Village, it's like I said, it's a very standard and straightforward experience. I do appreciate the fact that they brought back Mercenaries mode. Mercenaries mode is a lot of fun, and there's multiple stages and various upgrades to get, so it's not like a one and done type of thing. It's something that they want you to keep going back to and keep trying for a better score. And there is quite a bit of replayability with like the in-game unlock menus and whatnot, which you can unlock collectibles such as the character models, the in-game character models for the model viewer, concept art, various weapon unlocks, and infinite ammo cheats that you can implement, which comes in handy on the game's hardest difficulty. But all these elements and concepts are things that we've seen before in prior games, so it's not anything new. Ultimately, I think this game fails to live up to Resident Evil 7, which again was a true revitalization for Resident Evil as a whole. And this game once again just goes back to what the problem was before Seven's release. Now, if you're an OG fan of Resident Evil, if you're someone who just likes the older games, be them like the Resident Evil 4 through 6 era or the Resident Evil 1 through 3 era, Code Veronica and all that, and you didn't really care for Resident Evil 7, or you're not big into like first person perspective games. If someone like that were to ask me, should I still check this out? I would say, yeah, definitely. If you're a Resident Evil fan, this is definitely a Resident Evil game. This isn't no Outlast bullshit or anything like that. You should definitely give it a shot and make up your own mind as to whether or not the game's for you or not. I think the game is definitely more than good enough for that. for the hardcore like audience or whatever, the people who really are big fans of this series, definitely, this game, if anything, it was made for the hardcore fans. So I would say, yeah, I definitely give it a shot. But anyone who fits that description who's watching this, I would say just temper your expectations, because this is not a major change or revolution for this particular franchise.
I know.